I venture to say, often say, that no country that has developed economically has done so without developing their transport system. Okay? It is a requisite, it is a prerequisite. Many countries are developing walkways, pedestrian streets, cycleways, their public transport, and we haven't, right? So we don't want to do that because people feel if we do that, we are still poor.
They often say that Singapore has this, India has this, Bangladesh has this. Maybe we go to developed countries like Japan and we compare Sri Lanka with them and say there's a gap in terms of the transport that is provided in the country. In our day-to-day lives, we face mobility requirements. It might be to go to work, take your kids to school, or go grocery shopping. But most of the time in Sri Lanka, people do not enjoy that. Sometimes we hear complaints coming out of people about mobility or transport in general. Maybe the roads are too congested, the public transport is too crowded. So there are myriad of problems that are there. And is there an engineering approach that we can utilize to solve these problems and provide better transportation for the people of the country? This is what we are going to talk about. And we have an expert in this discipline, Professor Amal Kumarage, who will talk about this in detail. What do you think we can do to solve these transportation requirements with an engineering approach?
Yes, so Professor Niles, thank you for that question. Every country has mobility requirements, and the issues that you mentioned happen when those requirements are not satisfactorily met. As you know, sometimes when you go abroad, we see the difference. Some are better than us, some are much worse. So how do we, in which direction do we go? There is many a complaint that things are getting worse here. So when it comes to engineering, engineering approach to solving transportation or mobility problems is one of many options we have, or any country has. For example, there are countries that will go with the popular sentiments. Everybody likes to have a car, so you keep providing more roads and importing more cars. That's one approach to try and solve it. There are other countries that are more business-oriented. They would like to do things that bring in revenue to certain people who want to be part of the economy. Then there are other countries which will want to generate their own industries like automotive manufacturing and so on. So we need to figure out what is good for us. We are not a vehicle producing country. We do not have our own oil. We are a high density, population density country. So therein is the definition of the problem. So to take an engineering approach, first we need to actually study the problem. No engineering solution or no effective engineering solution is possible, not only for transport, for anything, unless you are on top of the problem. So to begin with thinking of an engineering solution, we have to look at what are the trip patterns people make, what is the affordability people have, what are the sort of functions of trip requirements. Do people want the speed or safety or comfort, or is it that the cost? And then we have to come up with designs that will meet those parameters. So what is needed for, let's say, rural areas may be different to urban areas. What people wanted 10, 20 years ago when the income levels were less may be different to now, and maybe yet different to what they will need in another 20 years. So any engineering solution starts with understanding that. And then, of course, we then put it into the engineering process. We come up with concept designs, and then we look at what solutions are there. So there are many technical solutions today, but they all come with certain constraints. Some are constrained by cost in terms of what it costs to construct or buy, and some are constrained by operating costs, and very often they both constrain you. Others have environmental issues, others require a lot of land. So the engineering design has to take all of these into consideration. We call them alternatives. We have to come up with different concepts, different alternatives. And finally, we should take it through an assessment process and come up with what's best for the country. And most often, transport solutions need to be long-term, minimum 20, 30 years, and the world changes very quickly nowadays. So we need to be able to forecast the future, look at the scenarios that our economy, our society might go through, and come up with the best. And that, I think, is the engineering approach we need to take, not only for transport, for many utilities. And I think if we do that, I think we'll be on the right way to solve those problems you mentioned.
Yes, and I think one of the important things we need to also recognize is oftentimes people compare Sri Lanka with other countries. They often say that Singapore has this, India has this, Bangladesh has this. Maybe we go to developed countries like Japan and we compare Sri Lanka with them and say there's a gap in terms of the transport that is provided in the country. But we also need to recognize the fact that Sri Lanka is a unique country in itself. We are a low and middle income country with an approximate per capita GDP of about $3,000. So we might not be able to come up with a plug and play solution with respect to what we as a country need to do to nurture our transportation and mobility sector. But in terms of that, I think what you alluded to was the importance of having a very good policy that we can implement. How important do you think is having that sort of a policy for a country like Sri Lanka? And what should we do in order to make sure that the transportation policy that we develop is implemented?
Yes, so I don't think an engineering approach can be taken without those defining parameters. And you're right to say that, ask the question, do we have a policy within which transportation solutions can be properly planned and strategized? And I think the last approved transport policy is that of 2009. There have been many attempts to improve on that, but for all practical purposes, other than a few issues here and there, that is still good. But the issue is not what is there on paper, it is our inability to take a policy forward and implement it according to policy. Many things have happened since 2009, but not really subscribing to the policy. So policy will define those parameters. And I think what is important is for us to consider what will be the defining policies within which transport supply has to be provided. So the first thing I would say is Sri Lanka is a geographically small country. Secondly, we are the 38th most densely populated country in the world. And as I said, we do not produce oil. We do not have a large automotive industry that generates jobs and economic output. We have a good tradition of public transport, and these are the defining parameters. I would add the fact that we only have a per capita income of $4,000. So we have to come up with the solution within these parameters. There are also some other constraining things like emissions. The world is now committed to reducing the carbon emissions, and these are also directions in which we should go. So I think these will provide for us the defining policy. Now sometimes I have seen policy come up with projects, right, and saying, okay, we need to have expressways, or we need to build metros, or things like that. And this is poor policy, because policy must understand the problem. Policy must define the canvas on which engineers and planners must come up with those solutions. So if you take, you referred to countries like Singapore. Say Singapore, for example, is one of the most densely populated urbanized countries, and it has 80% of its mobility carried by public transport. Now the issue is that Singapore's car ownership, on the other hand, is only 15 vehicles per 1,000 people. Now, Sri Lanka, we have 257 vehicles per 1,000 people, and our social orientation is hitherto to say that the more vehicles we have, the more developed the more prosperous we are. So on that account, Singapore is still a very poor country because it has only 10 vehicles, 15 vehicles per 1,000 people. Why? But one of the best, you don't need a vehicle in Singapore because the public transport is so developed, right? Now, as the population density increases, the percentage of people using public transport must increase. Now we have, gone the other way, right? We had 70-80% of the people using public transport. Now we are down to about less than 40, maybe closer to 30. So we need to reverse this trend by improving, what is appropriate for us.
So, Professor Kumarage, I think one of the questions that comes up to my mind is, of course, you talked about vehicle ownership, and it's very popular for people. If you take a young individual, maybe a young adult who goes through university, one of the first dreams they have is vehicle ownership. But at the other end of the spectrum, as you very correctly mentioned, Sri Lanka is one of the most densely populated countries in the world. And especially if you take the Western Province, it's very heavily populated and the density is very high. So, when we look at it, it seems very logical to have public transportation as a solution for densely populated areas. So we have a contradiction between these policies, and we often see politicians, regardless of the party, promoting vehicle ownership, and at the same time they also say, we have to improve public transportation. So you see a little bit of a contradiction that is emerging. So what do you think we should look at? Because I think in one way, if we promote private transportation, that creates a little bit of a race to the bottom for the public transportation that is already there, because the ridership will go down. So what do you think the government and various policymakers should do in terms of providing a proper transportation solution?
Yeah, so the first thing that they should do is to understand how scientific solutions are necessary. Engineering is a science, and as I mentioned earlier, each government must decide how to tackle a problem. We can go traditional ways, we can go with what the people want, we can go with what's popular, politically popular, or we can actually learn from the sciences that have evolved in this area, which other countries have used to develop their mobility and their transport services. I venture to often say that no country that has developed economically has done so without developing their transport system. Okay, it is a requisite, it is a prerequisite. So if you don't develop it, you don't get there. We are thinking of $10,000, $20,000 per capita income, and until we fix our transportation, I can assure you that is just going to become a very slow journey that might never actually materialize. So we need to quickly fix our transportation industry to our 4,000 per capita income level. To take it to 8,000, and maybe the solutions that we need from 8,000 beyond may have to be slightly different. Now, you talked about this political dilemma that we often hear, wanting to promote vehicle ownership and build expressways and flyovers constantly, because that is the dream of the middle classes as is defined. And then you don't want to antagonize the lower income classes and say we will not forget public transport, right? But in reality, in Sri Lanka, it has been a very confused approach. As you know, public transport has not developed, right? And actually, you take a vehicle and go, you can't really go anywhere either. Okay, so it's a lose-lose situation. It's not that one group has won the other. So we need to combine this to know what is the solution we need to provide so that everybody is satisfied. Now, Sri Lanka has this sort of colloquial kind of thinking that things like cycling, walking, and public transport is for poor people. Right now, the countries that you mentioned have come out of that long time ago. So the first thing that our politicians must do is to say, no, that is not the way the science works. Right? Many countries are developing walkways, pedestrian streets, cycleways, their public transport, and we haven't, right? So we don't want to do that because people feel if we do that, we are still poor. No, they have done that, and we must promote those as symbols of economic development and actually advanced urban and city planning. Now, on the other hand, let's look at the middle class dream, right? As you mentioned, students coming out of the university, get a job, get married, and get a car, and then only build a house, So that's the order of priority. Now, how much is this driven by real need? How much of it is driven by social status, right? And I know some of these people, because they can't realize those, they feel that you can't even work in this country or live in this country because these things are not affordable, right? That is because I think we have created this wrong social imagery that you must have these things if you are professional, if you are educated, if you are income is high. I think that's the social messaging that must go. But then also we need to have a distinction between owning a vehicle and using a vehicle. Right? Now in Singapore, because their population density is so high, way back from 1970s, they adopted the severest combination of saying you ownership, they made it difficult, use also they made it difficult. But countries like ours, which are like high medium population density, a lot of European countries are like that, Japan is like that, they don't make both these difficult at the same time. Okay, they either make ownership difficult or they make use difficult, right? So we could go with that, you can own a car, but you can't use it when the roads are congested. Well, you can use it, but you may have to pay for it, okay? So I think we need to work out this kind of strategy, because otherwise everybody desires to have a car. If you buy a car, you feel you have to use it, and then the roads get congested, and then we have major economic problems. Now, for example, 25% of our imports into this country is for oil for transport, and the importation of vehicles, 25%. And I don't know of a country which spends 25% of its import bill to get transport imports, when there are so many other things for the quality of life, for development and so on. And not only that, the central bank statistics show that 25% of household expenditure is also spent for mobility, and food comes just a little more than that. So I think these are things that we have gradually got used to, which are imposing a lot of economic hardship on the country's macroeconomy as well as household economies. So getting this policy right, actually it is inverting the current policy, which is cars first, let's promote cars, and public transport, let's just let it carry on. I think that has to be inverted, and I think that if we do, lots of engineering solutions to improve public transport.
So on that point, I think one could say that perhaps one of the reasons that people are looking at embracing private transportation is, of course, that our existing transportation system, the public transportation system, be it the railway system, which has been there for probably about 160 years, and the bus network, has not really become updated with the requirements of the public over time. And at the same time, as you mentioned, there's also this concern about the socio-economic status that is displayed by public transportation as well as through private transportation. So do we think that we can resurrect the existing public transportation sector, or should we inject new modes of transportation, new public transportation modes into the overall picture in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, so obviously we have to start with what we have. One, they are in place. People have got used to it. But I agree that they are in very bad shape. So one may be tempted, as you said, to say that these are they cannot be revived. People have not, different governments, various people have tried to, and it's not recoverable. So why not bring brand new systems we see in other countries? But the problem is that we need to work not only work from what we have, but we must know where we are going to, what systems are good for us. Now, if we needed to go towards what we call mass transit systems like metros and LRTs and so on, then we must know that that's the direction in which we go, even though we may start with the buses and railways. But now, where are metros and LRTs more suitable? Now, metros are there in many cities. They are large cities, or they have to be very economically prosperous cities, ideally both. More than $4,000 per capita or more than a couple of million people in the city itself. Now, Sri Lanka doesn't have that kind of city. Okay, we will not have cities of that size anyway. Economically, we will develop slowly, and maybe a city like Colombo, we might have rapid transit as the best solution maybe in 2040 or so, right? So when we are proposing systems like LRT as immediate solutions, we are actually saying, that's anyway going to take 7-8 years to come. It's something that is good for the long term. But we are not offering something until then, right? But that is if that is the most suitable. But if you take Sri Lanka, which is a medium high density country, for countries like that, particularly where Sri Lanka's urban profile is concerned, they say that about 50% of our people are living in areas that are about 50% urbanized. Sri Lanka, there is no clear distinction between what is a city and what is the game, the rural, right? It's sort of a bit of both. So in a situation like that, population density is not very high in one place and then nothing just outside the city. So in places like that, you can have metros and things there, and after that, basically nothing, But in Sri Lanka, this is a sort of a continuous thing. Sri Lanka is a small country where average travel distance are very less, right? So the ideal system for a country like Sri Lanka to develop is the bus system, which is ideal for short-term, medium density, where it can stop every 300-400 meters, and then there is a group of houses, there is a by road coming. Most of Sri Lanka is like that. So I would say that's where we need to begin. And bus systems are the cheapest to recover. They are actually most profitable even now. The government doesn't have to invest, borrow and do that. We cannot borrow right now. So that's where we should. And we now have the digital technology to actually help us, improve our services to the best in the world. And countries like Korea are doing this now, India is doing this now, and even their systems bus systems were not that great 10, 20 years ago. But they have brought this with the IT development, the Industrial 4 revolution, and plugged it into public transport to make it develop. So buses is a must, followed by the railway, which is also extensive, and the integration of both of these into common platforms where data information sharing is there, ticketing is possible, integration of transfers is possible, even plug into taxis and three-wheelers. I think this kind of integrated public transport, which is already there but not integrated, not brought together. And I think technologically it's available. We have the people, we have the software, even the hardware available. And the question is policy and then the approach.
Yes, so I think we talked about a very important topic. Transportation is not something on the face value you'd say that you cannot live without, but in reality it's something that really threads across your life. Whether you want to go to your workplace, whether you want to visit some place, it is a derived demand that you have to have. It's a must have. So to sum up our conversation, I think I would just say there are 3 points that we can take away. The first one is, of course, the importance of a proper transportation policy and, of course, the implementation of that. The second one is, of course, that we should have a proper assurance with respect to vehicle ownership. And also, thirdly, there should be some level of effort in terms of promoting public transportation to meet the requirements of the public. Am I right?
You couldn't have said it better. Yes, absolutely.
It was an insightful conversation, Professor Kumarage. Thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully this gives people a perspective of what we need to look forward for the future. Thank you.